The old regime in exile at the cricket at Lord's. But yesterday, there's no normal changing of the political guard. Everyone around the table at Boris Johnson's new cabinet has pledged they will not obstruct a no-deal Brexit, won't bail out on the journey.
We are now committed, all of us, to leaving the European Union on October the 31st, or indeed earlier. No ifs, no buts.
Dissent has been ironed out of this cabinet. Boris Johnson hopes that means messages like the one he went to the Commons today to deliver will shift the European Union's stance on the withdrawal agreement.
And we've only had our new Prime Minister for 24 hours. It's absolutely amazing.
Knowing they are now faced with a British cabinet that will risk a no-deal Brexit.
I do not accept the argument that says these issues can only be solved by all or part of the UK remaining in the customs union or in the single market. The evidence is that other arrangements are perfectly possible. My team and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, are ready to meet and talk on this basis to the Commission or other EU colleagues whenever, wherever they are ready to do so.
The EU's negotiator, Michel Barnier, emailed EU countries saying, as suggested by Boris Johnson's rather combative speech, we have to be ready for a situation where he gives priority to the planning for no deal, partly to heap pressure on the unity of the EU 27. London, Mr Barnier said, must be told the EU isn't budging. Both sides sounded like they were waiting for the other to show signs of compromise before any talks could take place. Jeremy Corbyn said the new government was hard right.
No one underestimates this country, but the country is deeply worried that the new Prime Minister overestimates himself.
Labour, he said, would oppose no deal and any deal he negotiated.
And if he has the confidence to put that decision back to the people, we would, in those circumstances, campaign to remain.
Did anybody notice the terrible metamorphosis that took place, like the final scene of Invasion of the Body Snatchers? At last, this long-standing Eurosceptic, the right honourable gentleman, has been captured, he has been jugulated, he has been reprogrammed by his honourable friends. He has been turned now into a Remainer. It is this party that is on the side of the people who voted so overwhelmingly in 2016.
It all sounded like a dress rehearsal for a general election in which the parties are more entrenched than ever in the 2016 referendum divisions. And now entrenched in number 10, Dominic Cummings, the mastermind behind the Vote Leave campaign, not a traditional party man, as one who worked with him in the coalition government remembers.
I certainly wouldn't use the word conservative about Dom. I mean, he's a radical. He's a bit like Michael Gove, a Maoist in some ways. He believes in progress through a process of creative destruction. There's nothing small c conservative about him.
An early election is really very likely now. I think that the reshuffle yesterday, in some senses, was a clearing of the decks for that election. And what you can see is the strategy. The strategy will be to basically see off the Brexit party and to try and maximise the Conservative share of the Leave vote. That's the strategy. Dom Cummings is back in Downing Street. That will be his strategy. It will be Lyndon Crosby's strategy, and it will be the new Prime Minister's strategy to win a fourth term, but this time not as a modern, compassionate Conservative party, but as a hard right, Thatcherite Conservative party.
Brexit isn't about right or left, because you've got people who vote Labour who are Brexiteers and people who vote Conservative that are Brexiteers.
Back in the Commons, a warning from the Welsh nationalists for Boris Johnson about his political tactics.
Can he confirm to me which is his heart's desire? Leaving the European Union or retaining the United Kingdom? Because he's going to have to pick one. Do or die.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Speaker.
Parliament has now risen for the summer. Some Tories' spirits were cheered, not all.
I think many of us are going to go away on our summer holidays full of dread and fear about what is going to happen.
Because you think this autumn there's going to be a mighty clash between Parliament, his government, that could end in a general election?
I don't see how there can be anything other than a head-on collision.
In 6 weeks' time, this car will sweep back in through the gates of Parliament to update MPs on Brexit progress. And an autumn of even bigger political convulsions could be upon us.
Gary Gibbon reporting. Now, earlier I spoke to the Children and Families Minister, Nadeem Zahawi. I asked him what he made of the cabinet reshuffle so far.
I think what you've seen with Boris, which I think has surprised many, is the speed and precision of getting his cabinet together. I mean, many a incoming prime minister in the past or a shadow leader had butchered a reshuffle.
4 billion promised today for education. But the tragedy for him, sure, is that we knew this already.
And it just demonstrates that he is basically living up to his promises.
Well, he's only saying, I'm going to do what was promised in the last administration.
Well, look, he's only been in office for hours, and he's already delivering on that promise. That's a good place to begin.
It had all the feel of new money, and that is always the problem with incoming administrations. Is there going to be something new? You need much more money than 4 billion. How much would you like to ask him for?
As the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Rishi Sunak, is on record this morning saying there is a 26 billion headroom. If we get a good deal from the European Union, I think you'll find the economy will continue
But
to
you'll be asking
motor.
for a chunk of that.
Well, there is going to be a spending review in good time. There'll be more money going into children's social care and high needs and, of course, education overall, as Boris has promised.
Do you see the diversity in the cabinet as just happen chance, or this is a deliberate move by Boris Johnson to reflect the makeup of the country?
I think it demonstrates Boris's ability to bring different talents together. People who may have campaigned for Remain, Robert Buckland and Nicky Morgan and Amber Rudd, and Brexiteers.
Cabinet is still a cabinet of toffs. I mean, it's basically...
That's not true.
No, I mean, but they are people who've either been privately educated or made a lot of money.
So the Foreign Secretary and First Minister was a grammar school boy. The Chancellor was not privately educated, a working class boy from Rochdale. The father was, as we've heard many times over,
out, but they don't represent the majority.
Bus driver. Well, you look at who else is around the table. The thing that you can no longer, I think, say about the Conservative Party, and we saw that in the final hustings in London, that we are a party of just the privileged or tossed.
The truth is, the overhang over all this is Brexit. And you're pretty happy on a no deal if it has to happen?
No, I don't want to see a no deal. I think
you'd vote against it?
No, I wouldn't vote against it because the best way to secure...
That doesn't sound very principled. I'm against it, but I wouldn't vote against it.
No, I'm not. You have to listen to me, John. The best way to secure a good deal is to prepare for no deal, because to be able to walk away is when you then allow the interlocutors to focus their mind as to move towards a compromise position.
You're going to say that by the 31st of October it's possible to negotiate another deal?
Well, what we have to do is prepare the nation. This is what Boris and the team are determined to do, so that we are ready, if we don't achieve a deal, a fair deal for the United Kingdom and a fair deal for the EU, then we can walk away on WTO terms. But by the way, in those terms, there is still a 9-month effectively standstill, which has already been negotiated.
98 days. And in that time, you think you can negotiate a deal that's good for Britain, good for Europe, good for everybody, good for your constituents in Stratford-on-Avon. It's unreal.
What you can't do is negotiate with yourself, which is, we're having this conversation by essentially taking our own options away. What you should do is prepare the nation, if we have to be able to walk away on WTO terms. This is the first Prime Minister who truly believes in Brexit and believes yes, it's a challenge, but the advantages beyond Brexit for this country.
Now, you know better...
Let me just finish this point. With a disciplined cabinet behind that Prime Minister, they, I think, will behave differently.
Well, you know better than anybody how austerity has really hit the poorest of the poor. There's been great suffering as a result of austerity. Apparently austerity is now over. But you're going to have to do an enormous amount of rebuilding, aren't you?
And Boris is already committed to making sure that he closes that gap. He's talking about our coastal towns, Scarborough and elsewhere, where we have to, as he put it, physically bring them back into the nation.
And they will be able to share in this golden age that he's described.
I certainly think they will.
You can see this golden age?
Well, let me tell you, the moment we deliver Brexit, I believe, I came from the world of business into politics, I can tell you there's a wall of money waiting to invest in the United Kingdom because this is the best country to put your money to invest in. That wall of money has priced in Brexit. What it hasn't priced in is a Jeremy Corbyn government.
Come out on no deal if we have to. There will be clean drinking water. And the planes will fly. Factories will be ready and business will be ready. No deal Brexit.
Hot town, summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirt and gritty.
Britain may be flying closer to a no deal, but Boris Johnson doesn't believe we'll be burned. Relax, we've got it in hand, appears to be the mantra. If only business shared his view. This Midlands food manufacturer is certainly proud of its British roots, but they're determined to maintain their close ties with Europe too. From humble beginnings selling meat door to door nearly 50 years ago, it now has sales of £200 million a year. With Brexit looming, they've stopped investing for now, but they're hoping the gates to the EU will remain open.
Boris Johnson has scoffed at bosses who warned that a no deal would be a catastrophe for business and the economy. But just take this one company here as an example. Roughly 20% of its 1,300 products currently sail through into the EU with no questions and no checks. But under a no deal, every single one of those products and all the thousands of ingredients that go into them would need to be checked, declared and cleared first, or they simply won't be allowed through. So with day one of Boris Johnson as PM, does that mean as a business you're now cranking up your no-deal plans given his rhetoric?
Yes, I think we have to. I think that there is a potentially higher risk of a no-deal Brexit. It will be way more complicated.
Jason is second generation of the Wurra family, now in charge of running the day-to-day operation.
The complexity of doing business will increase a great deal because of the fact that the paper trail, the testing of products and so on, the requirements needed to export and import will be far greater than they are at the moment.
The food industry is full of complex just-in-time supply chains, and the fear is it could all freeze up if we leave the EU with no deal. Mr. Wurra says he's as prepared as he can be, but he's worried about others.
It's not just you being ready, is it? It's your customers being ready.
Absolutely right.
And are they?
I don't think they are. I don't think the customers are ready. I think there's, because of the uncertainty, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, it's very, very difficult for a small to mid-sized business to plan.
It's not just businesses who are nervous. One senior source in charge of the government's no-deal planning has told Channel 4 News that less than half of the 150,000 British companies that trade across the continent have even bothered to register their details on the government's no-deal planning system. And if they don't do so by the end of July, it'll be too late.
That's an assertion that Boris Johnson would probably dismiss as poppycock. But he did admit today that more planning would be needed in the event of a no deal.
We must turbocharge our preparations to make sure that there is as little disruption as possible to our national life. And I believe that that is possible with the kind of national effort that the British people have made before and will make again.
He might be confident government will sort it. Others see it differently.
Businesses are concerned that government agencies aren't ready for a no-deal exit, that indeed many of the practical details that they need in order to get on and trade aren't sorted, and that they don't have the clarity on so many real-world questions like who can I hire, will my goods get across borders, is it going to cost me more to trade?
Bend down, isn't it a pity? Doesn't seem to be a shadow in the city.
This week's heatwave will no doubt soon peter out. But for business, the heat of a no deal looks set to keep on rising.
Well, regardless of the fears expressed by industry about the impact of a no-deal Brexit, there's growing speculation that Boris Johnson will shift dramatically from years of austerity and go on a £1 billion spending spree. Sajid Javid will be expected to deliver that as the new Chancellor. So what might he do? Our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi is here. Helia, what do we know about Sajid Javid's instincts?
Well, they seem rather changeable. He was always known as this arch Thatcherite, so much so that he had a framed picture of Margaret Thatcher in every one of his offices. He was one of George Osborne's key protégés, flag-waving for austerity at a drop of a hat. But now he's become one of a growing number of Tories that have done this volte-face from fiscal prudence at any cost to spend, spend, spend. And I think a further complication is that he presented himself as a Remainer, and yet here he is at the heart of a very hard Brexit government.
So how much might he spend?
Well, here's the shopping list. He'd like to see 20,000 police. That'll cost about £1 billion. He wants to increase spending in education to the tune of £4.6 billion. He wants social care to be a priority. We don't know by how much, but the ask is £8 billion. He wants to show love to public sector workers, and for every 1% increase in pay, the bill is £1.9 billion. And Jackie, this doesn't even include Boris Johnson's controversial promises on tax cuts, which may end up costing £26 billion.
Helia, thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add to that, you know, the issue is that the government ends up spending before every election cycle. So that gives you a flavour of what the Boris camp may be war planning for. But the scale of what's being done, it marks a radical departure from what Conservatives have been doing over the last 10 years. Some economists are talking about Sajid spending an extra 2% of GDP. And to give you some context, Jackie, the total cost of austerity has been £200 billion. A few years ago, Labour's radical manifesto promised an extra £48 billion, and that provoked raised eyebrows from Tories everywhere. And yet here we are today, and the Boris and Sajid show could end up matching that, because 2% of GDP would add up to £44 billion.
This time. Thank you very much. Sorry for trying to cut you off early. Now over to John.
For the longest time, Motherwell was considered the epitome of a Labour heartland. It is still strongly working class, but nowadays a town with an SNP MP, and 51% of people here voted for independence. Deeply embedded political allegiances have been broken. Yet the destruction of the steel industry under Thatcher,
when the 1,200-strong workforce were told their jobs were to disappear,
remains a painful memory here, and to be a Tory still seemed toxic. But some believe that was slowly changing. In 2017, the Conservatives went from 0 councillors to 10, led locally by 27-year-old Megan Gallagher.
Motherwell is my hometown. You know, I've grew up here all my life. For me, I will always be a Scottish Conservative and Unionist, and I do believe if you are a Conservative, no matter what part of the country, you should fight tooth and nail for that union.
How would you feel about bringing the new Prime Minister down here and walking around your ward, as it were?
Sure. I think it'd be an experience, but you know, that's something that people do like about Boris Johnson, is the fact that he never backs down to a challenge.
But you think it would be a challenge?
I think it would be a challenge because I don't believe that, you know, people... He's a bit of a Marmite character, isn't he? And I think he's got a lot to prove. I do understand that, you know, the people of Scotland, they might be a little bit, you know, they might have a few concerns about Boris Johnson, but we need to wait and see what we do. I believe in giving people a chance, and I think we've got to give Boris the chance to, you know, prove to the people of Scotland that his heart is here.
That certainly hasn't been proved yet, and it's not difficult to find detractors.
What do you think of Boris Johnson?
No comment.
Why?
We've just got two crazy men with crazy haircuts running America and here. I feel quite sad. He should think before he speaks, and that's what worries me. He doesn't. Hopefully he can do some good. I pray to God.
I think he could be a bit of a dangerous man, a bit careless with words.
Dangerous? What do you mean by dangerous?
Some of the things he comes out with. He comes across a bit anti-Scottish at times, which I don't think can be a good thing. When we're trying to remain part of Britain, I think we need to have the Westminster government look to include us, not to exclude us. I think that could be bad.
A recent poll by Panel Base showed the prospect of Prime Minister Boris Johnson could increase support for Scottish independence.
This is my great-grandson.
Hello.
That prospect is now reality. So will his premiership intensify nationalism?
I think it might push for Scotland independence, and I think we might get it this time.
Have you had lots of people saying that?
Yeah.
Well, a few of my friends are worried in that, but, well, no worried, but just, I think they would rather see independence come now.
Because of Boris Johnson?
And Brexit as well.
He's young and all that, and the way they think it's a sort of Scottish thing or Scotland and whatever, but they don't know the big implications of everything.
So you've got a generational divide here?
Yeah, aye,
a big generation.
2017's general election saw a surge in support for Scottish Tories, with a campaign focused on persuading those against independence to back them, even if they didn't traditionally.
After 6.5 weeks on the trail.
The fear for Ruth Davidson and the Scottish Conservatives is their efforts to detoxify the Tory brand are now being undone. Andy McIver worked on strategy for the party for many years.
Boris Johnson is exactly what the SNP wants a Tory to be. He is rich, he's southern, he's posh, he's a Leave voter, and he has a streak of English nationalism about him. That is everything that Nicola Sturgeon would want a Tory to be. And so conversely, it's everything that Ruth Davidson doesn't want a Tory to be, and it's everything that Ruth Davidson herself is not. That is the problem.
The solution he backs? Splitting off the Scottish Tories entirely. First suggested back in 2011, it was dismissed by Ruth Davidson then and subsequently, but it is quietly winning support.
Are you saying that even if Scottish Tory MPs and MSPs are publicly holding the line, privately they're having conversations about splitting away?
There is no question there is a conversation going on. It's been going on for quite some time, and it's been intensified since it became clear that Boris was going to win this leadership contest. And the conversation is about how do we manage to keep ourselves alive.
In fact, Channel 4 News has learnt at least 8 Conservative MSPs are now strongly considering it. Scottish Tories have shifted the political landscape before. With this new Prime Minister, they may need to reinvent themselves again.
With me now is David Duckett, the Conservative MP for Banff-and-Buchan. Now, you supported Mr Gove during the competition for leadership. What do you think of Boris's first day?
I was very impressed with his performance today, particularly in the chamber when he made his statement.
You want a job, don't you?
I'm quite happy with the job I have, to be honest, which the people of Banff-and-Buchan gave me.
Just to be an MP?
Just to be an MP right now, yeah, fine with that.
How, I mean, if you look across Scotland, which after all was pretty strongly Remain, how do you think that whole constituency of the country is going to be affected?
Well, in 2016, of course, it's true that 62% of people who voted in that referendum in 2016 voted for the United Kingdom to remain in the EU. But in 2017, in the general election, 56% of the voters voted for parties, the main two parties, Conservative and Labour, who at the time at least were committed to leave the EU. And as time goes on, we're now 3 years on from the referendum result, more and more people, and I was talking to farmers at the weekend who were saying this very thing, is we've been waiting now to leave for 3 years. We just want the certainty. We just want it to get on with it.
Well, let me throw you another statistic at you. 65% of Scots in a poll recently said they feel Boris Johnson would be a poor or even terrible Prime Minister.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't told. I don't agree with that.
There is what they call a Boris factor north of the border. They don't like him.
I think there is a tendency for certainly the SNP and other opposition parties to characterise Boris as this caricature of everything that Scottish people don't like. But as I've got to know Boris more, I've discovered that he is actually that whole optimism and energy and purpose that he exudes is genuine. It's 100% genuine.
But I mean, what do you think of the debate over whether Scottish Conservatives should actually break away from the UK party?
Well, technically we're a separate party, but I don't think we need to be completely separate.
Well, what is separate or completely separate?
Well, we certainly shouldn't be emphasising the need to be separate, because that would fall right into the SNP hands of Scotland being
but, I mean, if you take someone
separate
like
from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Who leads the party in Scotland, I mean, to what extent would she represent a rather different party to the one in Britain?
Well, we're not that different, of course, because we are Conservative and Unionist.
But you are different over.
I mean, you've got Scottish Liberal Democrats, you've got Scottish Labour, you've got Scottish Conservative and Unionist. That's just
I'm
how it
really
is.
meaning on the Brexit issue, though.
Yeah. Well, as Ruth Davidson herself said, I mean, we have to deliver on Brexit because that was the will of the British people in the United Kingdom that we are committed to remaining within. And as Ruth Davidson famously said, when it comes to fishing, which is a very important factor in my constituency, we're all Brexiteers.
Now, when do you think the really exciting moment will come when Boris Johnson actually visits Scotland? Is it something you hunger for?
Absolutely. I think part of the problem is Boris, like many English MPs, to the Scottish voter seems like something that's remote and far away. The more exposure that people like Boris and other of his colleagues can have in Scotland, I think they'll get to know him and trust him the same way I do.
Well, I can see where your loyalties lie, but a no-deal Brexit, surely even you would admit, would be deeply damaging to the Union.
Nobody wants a no-deal Brexit. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, least of all. As
well,
he said,
he's the one who's raised it.
Well, at least but we have to prepare for a no-deal Brexit in case that happens.
Yeah,
because
but
if
the rhetoric before the leadership thing was, you know, he wanted it.
Well, the Theresa May herself said no deal is better than a bad deal.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Boris Johnson. Thanks, Boris Johnson. I'm honoured.
He's been all over the news, and now it looks like he's planning to get all over your Facebook feed too. In the last 48 hours, hundreds of adverts have appeared, many of them the same, but targeted to different sections of the nation. Is this simply what modern leaders do, or what they do when preparing for an election in a digital age? Or both?
This is all a bit of a test for the Conservatives. You know, they've got a new leader, they're trying new things.
This is Craig Dillon's area of expertise. Here he is with Boris Johnson. He's just finished running Mr Johnson's digital campaign for Tory leadership.
Thank you for coming. Hi, Craig. How are you doing? Nice to see you.
In fact, Craig did the same for 6 of the 10 Tories who ran to be leader.
They all look pretty much the same.
They are all the same. They are basically the same. The only thing that changes is who is seeing them. So the reason why you've done that is so that by running 185 of those different, if we just put one ad out and it got, say, 1 million views, you can't really figure out, it's a little bit more complicated to figure out where those views are. Yeah. But by running that many of them, if, say, one of them that you know you ran in, say, Essex, has got 1 million views, you know that this sort of content is working quite well in Essex.
In the last 48 hours, more than 500 adverts have been published by the Conservatives. Tracking clicks helps work out which messages work well, where, and with whom. So why?
If I was a betting man, I would say there would be an election coming up. It seems like the exact sort of behaviour that a party would be doing if they were building up to a general election.
This digital strategy is nothing new.
Roughly about 7 million people, 1.5 billion digital ads.
That's Dominic Cummings, mastermind of Vote Leave, who yesterday was appointed senior advisor to the Prime Minister and today was accused by Labour of being behind the new Tory ads.
We're seeing a lot of the same digital marketing tactics as was used by Vote Leave. So lots of different variations of advertising and using, in some ways, quite similar messages. So it's about Brexit, and then it's also following up with other issues around the NHS and schools and things like that.
The Conservative Party say their new adverts are all normal practice and part of ongoing digital activity that Tory HQ undertakes throughout the year.
Hi, thanks, Boris Johnson. Hi, thanks, Boris Johnson. Hi, Boris Johnson. I'm honoured.
Albeit standard practice with a digital footprint that will certainly help with an election, whenever that may be.